All right, we're gonna tie a variation of Craig Mathews sparkle dun and try to give a few tips on how to tie the sparkle dun. This is definitely a variation. There's plenty of videos already out there on Craig tying the sparkle dun, and lucky enough to see Craig tie a sparkle dun here in Great Falls. So here's a few tips from that, and maybe some ways to tie some variants that I think make this fly even more effective. So nothing wrong with the original pattern, but if we're fishing flat water and we're truly fishing this as a BWO pattern, I think adding some variants to the body and the wing make it fish even better. So I'll show you what those are. Okay, so this is just a NU number 406 dry fly hook in size 16. Probably want to tie these more so down into 18s and even 20s for the Missouri where we're at. This is a 12-aught nano silk olive thread. I'm gonna start with 2 CDC tufts. This is the medium gray dun color, and I'm gonna pinch them together, the tips together here, and the whole idea here is we want this wing to be about the same length as the shank of the hook. And if the wing is a little smaller, I think that's good, because like I said, this is a size 16, so if we profile the fly slightly smaller on the CDC, which will be the most visible part, that is probably okay. All right, so we're just gonna 1/3 down the shank is what Craig always says. This is maybe a tiny bit forward from that, but we want this to look like a mayfly, so 1/3 down the shank, 2 CDC tufts, and then we're gonna put the elk hair on behind that. So one of the key points Craig always points out is to use hollow elk or deer hair. Don't use coastal deer hair, it's thin, and as we get into size 18s and 20s of this fly, we need the fibers, obviously in the ends, to be springy all the way to the end. So find some springy deer or elk hair. I think we even have some called compare dun hair now. Pretty much any elk or deer hair that comes from the Midwest, which is most of the stuff that we get, unless it's labeled coastal deer hair from Nature Spirit or Hairline, is from the north. So usually we have pretty springy fibers to work with. If you're a hunter, you have infinity. We will stack those tips quick here. Want the tips to be nice and neat. And on this fly, I don't want too many elk fibers because, like, we already have the CDC up there. So these fibers aren't really made to look like the wing. These are to add floatability and visibility to this fly. So we want those fibers to just stick out past the tip of the CDC, and we'll wrap them in with a couple of wraps here. And cut all the fibers off the back. Okay. All right. So one of the things Craig has in a tip when you watch his videos of tying this is to not rely on putting a bunch of dubbing up here to hold this back, because if you fish it a bunch, it's just going to end up looking like a cripple style pattern, because all these fibers will eventually push forward. Probably especially true when we got the CDC up front, so we'll take his advice. And another thing this does on this style or variation, it also helps mix the CDC in with the elk hair and mask the elk hair. So he pulls it kind of apart in 3 sections so that it all sits back. And then pulls the next section back, ties that in. And then he pulls the next section back, ties that in, to get them all to lay, hopefully, straight up. So Okay, got a few little spiky elk hairs sticking out, and that is what we wanted to go throughout the CDC there. So we have that. And it should be at this point sticking pretty straight up. Then we'll just we can wrap down those ends of those elk hairs as good as we can in the back. And we're just gonna leave the back end of this just a thread body, and I'll show you why here in a second. But we are gonna tie in some poly yarn or Z-Lon or whatever you have. That's a kind of a any kind of post material that floats. So this is about half of a normal, if you're pulling this off a card, this is half of that much. And just split in half. And we're gonna tie that in for the tail. Sometimes I tie in a wood duck tail over the Z-Lon just to make it profile more like a mayfly. Supposedly this is the shuck. And yeah, I guess it is, but I don't know what the fish really see it as. And then we're just going to kind of hold this up here kind of tight, and we're going to keep wrapping this all the way until where the elk hair is tied in, and then we have an orange post kind of here in the back. And we're just going to trim those off pretty even with the elk hair right at the top. Now we have an orange post. On this part here in the back, just kind of try to take a few fibers at a time and trim it so that it doesn't come off just as a flat trim. That doesn't look natural, in my opinion. And you don't want to leave the tail too long. You don't want it to wrap around the shank of the hook when you're fishing it. All right, so we got a little shuck tail there. Okay, then kind of the final step to this variation is we're going to make a dubbing loop. Bring our thread to the front here. And the color we are using for this Eurodub is called Living Calabatus. Looks really good as a Batis color. It's kind of a grayish olive, which is perfect. Has just a tiny bit of few flash fibers in it, but not too much. Then we will spin that. You want to put that kind of sparse inside that dubbing loop so that it looks something like that. And when you brush it out, it'll even get a little sparser, so I'll show you that. What I like to do is brush it out so it gets pretty thin, because this is just for the thorax of the dry fly. We don't want a huge bump on the bottom. That doesn't look natural. But we do want some fibers sticking out here. And then I just trim it to about the length I want this thing to be. So we're going to just put one wrap, kind of push the fibers forward for a second. They will go back after this next step, and then we'll pull them all backwards. We'll go underneath to cover the bottom. And then we'll try to do 2 or 3 wraps here at the front to create that thorax section here. All right, so then put put a couple of safety wraps behind it and then pull it back, the dubbing loop back before you cut it if you want a clean head. Make 2 or 3 nice wraps so you have a clean head, and then snip your dubbing loop off. Okay. Three or 4 turn whip finish. All right, and then I just like to trim the bottom here so that it's perfectly flush. We don't want a bunch of fibers sticking too far down. We want this thing to sit down into the water and let the CDC and the elk hair float it. Okay. And that is it. That's our little Euro dubbed version of a Craig Mathews sparkle dun. I think this is only the first few of these that we've tied. I was just messing around with the dubbing, and I for some reason came across a Craig Mathews video we filmed like 9 years ago here in Great Falls, and it's a cool, I think the sparkle dun's a great platform to just build all kinds of variations off of. So kudos to him for creating it. And you know, be creative. I think just the three things to remember if you want the kind of the sparkle dun wing to look right and to have a flush bottom but still profile kind of from the bottom view as a spinner, is to make sure you start the wing 1/3 of the way down the hook. Tie those fibers in a few different times, pulling them back when you tie in the elk hair, just to secure this wing as staying straight up and not starting to go forward like a cripple pattern would. Make sure you have coarse deer hair that springs up all the way into the tips. And make sure that the length of the wing is roughly the length of the shank of the hook. And those are, then you can just tie a bunch of variations from that. But those are some of the tips that I got from watching Craig tie the fly. And hopefully you guys come up with a bunch more variations. Check out the new Euro dub. We'll link that up in the bottom. And we'll have another tying video out soon. Thanks for watching.